This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the December monthly partnership meeting of the Southeast and Caribbean Disaster Resilience Partnership, or SCDRP for short. My name is Heather McCarthy. I have the honor and pleasure of serving as your executive director. I am coming to you live today from the festive clubhouse at my Homeport Marina in Jacksonville, Florida. So here's our agenda for today. First up, the results of this year's SCDRP Advisory Board election. Next, a few updates related to the SCDRP 9th Annual Meeting in Wilmington, North Carolina. And then I will introduce you to today's super speaker, Andrew Loeb Shoenig from the North Carolina Disaster Recovery Network. Next, a preview of our January and February monthly partnership meetings and upcoming member opportunities. And lastly, we will wrap up with partner sharing time. So please be ready with your announcements from around the region. So this year's SCDRP Advisory Board election ended on November 22nd. So thank you to all members that voted. And on behalf of SCDRP, I am delighted to congratulate our incoming advisory board members, some of whom are returning and some of whom are new to sitting on our advisory board. First, congratulations to Dr. Dwayne DeFries. Dwayne is the Executive Director of the Indian River Lagoon Council, and Dwayne has served as the chair of the SCDRP Advisory Board this year, and he returns to us next year to continue his service in the state of Florida seat. We are also excited to welcome back Patrick Howell, the Program Manager of Community Resilience at IBTS, the Institute for Building Technology and Safety. Patrick will return to serve in one of the nonprofit organization seats. We are also thrilled to welcome Dr. Patricia Gomez into the local government seat on the SCDRP Advisory Board. Patricia is the interim Chief Resilience Officer and Director of Energy for one of the largest and most vulnerable local governments in our region, Miami-Dade County, Florida, with its 3 million residents. Also, a big congratulations to Alyssa Zabrowski, who will be representing the federal government on our advisory board. Alyssa is the Southeast and Caribbean Regional Preparedness Coordinator for the NOAA Disaster Preparedness Program. We also welcome 2 new to the board professionals into the academic institution seats on the SCDRP Advisory Board. Congratulations to Dr. Asla Aslan. Asla is a professor of environmental health sciences and the director of the Institute for Water and Health at Georgia Southern University in Savannah, Georgia. Also from Georgia, we welcome Megan Jones. Megan is the Coastal Resilience Specialist at the University of Georgia Marine Extension and Georgia Sea Grant. A warm congratulations to all of our newly elected advisory board members. I am looking forward to a productive 2025 with your leadership and guidance, and thank you again for bringing your experience and expertise to us. It is time to secure your registration for the SCDRP 9th annual meeting. So remember, we keep our annual meetings intentionally small. We cap our registration at 125, and we have sold out for the last 2 years, so please be sure to register early. The theme of this year's meeting is Cultivating Climate Resilience Communities, Advances in Communication and Collaboration. Each session will closely examine best practices in communication and unique and innovative ways to foster collaboration across disciplines and political and geographical boundaries. We are assembling a dynamite lineup of speakers this year and an incredible 4-station multi-speaker field trip examining the battleship North Carolina's battle against sea level rise. So check the 9th annual meeting website often for updates. And I look forward to seeing everyone in Wilmington, North Carolina on February 4th and 5th, 2025. Mark December 18th on your calendars. We have 2 important deadlines coming up. First, applications for the registration scholarships are due Wednesday, December 18th. We have 10 registration scholarships available, and they will be competitively awarded based on essay responses. These scholarships are typically awarded to nonprofit staff and graduate students, but they are open to anyone in need. So please share this opportunity within your networks. We are so excited to be offering the opportunity for poster presentations this year. This is new to us. To better accommodate our academic partners, we have extended the deadline to Wednesday, December 18th. Because of limited space for poster presentations at the conference venue, SCDRP will accept a maximum of 32 posters for the upcoming meeting in Wilmington. If we receive more than 32 submissions, we will accept those that adhere most closely to the conference theme, Cultivating Climate Resilience Communities, Advances in Communication and Collaboration, and the theme that we have determined for the focus of the poster session, and that is addressing specific underserved and underrepresented communities. We aim to have balanced representation from both student and non-student presenters. So share with your networks, share widely, and submit your poster abstracts today. So SCDRP is able to host our annual in-person convening with the support of sponsors. Thank you, gold sponsors, SWCA Environmental Consultants and Battleship North Carolina for their extensive in-kind contributions to make our field trip a reality. Thank you to our silver sponsors so far, North Carolina Division of Coastal Management, Haggerty Consulting, and a joint sponsorship from the University of South Carolina Arnold School of Public Health and E.J. Strong, or Environmental Justice Strong. Thank you to our bronze sponsors, Moffitt and Nickel and the Center for Sustainable Communities. Support regional collaboration by adding your logo to this list. And how can you add your logo to this list? Scan this QR code to take a look at the benefits associated with each level of sponsorship. I would like to point out that both silver and gold will be given inserts into the digital and print annual meeting program. Gold sponsors will also set up tables in the ballroom and have the option of introducing a session of their choice. So become a sponsor between now and January 13th, 2025, and thank you for your support. And now it is my absolute pleasure to introduce today's super speaker, Andrew Loeb Shoenig. Andy, if you could wave. Andy is the facilitator of the North Carolina Inclusive Disaster Recovery Network, or NCIDR for short, and he's also the program director of the Rural Prosperity and Investment Initiative with MDC. Andy is passionate about bringing people together across boundaries to solve problems and strengthen collaborations. As the program director for community resilience, he leads a team that identifies, amplifies, and connects individual leaders, organizations, and coalitions towards a future where communities can thrive in an environment characterized by change and uncertainty. With a focus on rural communities and communities in the margins, Andy uses an array of technical assistance methods, including facilitation, conflict mediation, training, coaching, and relationship brokering. Andy joined MDC in September 2019 as a partnership manager, and he was promoted to program director in 2021. Prior to joining the team, Andy organized international exchange programs to build sustainable relationships across the aisle, across the sectors, and across the globe. From 2009 to 2011, he was a Fulbright teaching assistant in Vienna, Austria, with a focus on cross-cultural communication. Andy graduated with a BA in History and German Studies from Emory University and a Master of Public Administration from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Originally from Atlanta, Georgia, Andy now calls North Carolina home, and today he is joining us from Chapel Hill, North Carolina. So we've been trying to get Andy since last June when he was recommended by you, the partners, to speak during our Partner Pick Summer Series. And as Andy told me on Monday, oh, man, if you think I was underwater then, I'm now drowning. Andy and his network have been playing a critical role since Hurricane Helene devastated North Carolina in September. And that is why I just want to take a minute to say a very special thank you to Andy. Andy, thank you for keeping us on your calendar and for bringing us timely updates and insights to our partnership today. It is my pleasure to present Andy Shoenig.
Thanks, y'all. I am excited to be here. I'm excited to see a couple of familiar faces. Hey, Frank. Hey, see Brian Byfield. I'm sure I'm missing a couple of others, but I'm also even more excited to be with a bunch of new folks. That's how networking works. My name is Andy Shoenig. I use he, him pronouns. Some of y'all have emailed me before, and so you see Andrew. I use Andy to sound taller over email, but if we meet in person, you'll know that I'm about 5'3". I would invite you if you're in a place where you can. I appreciate the emojis. It helps. Zoom is weird, right? Because I got a sense of humor, but you don't always get that virtually. If you're in a place where you're okay turning your cameras on, I'd love to invite a lot of dialogue throughout this. Otherwise, it'll be kind of death by PowerPoint. What you're seeing on the screen is my team at the Rural Prosperity Investment Team at MDC. MDC overall is about 50 folks. We are one of the largest teams. That's our full-time staff there. MDC, for folks who don't know, meaning dignity and community. We catalyze and accelerate economic mobility across 13 states by activating change makers, strengthening capacity, framing key issues, and cultivating networks, centering equity through it all. And we do that across 4 issue areas currently. The ones that I'm kind of representing are certainly the Rural Prosperity and Investment Team that I work on primarily, but in talking to folks here from state government, from consulting firms, from academia, kind of the folks who have some access to some mainstream power, we're also working through that leadership and philanthropy issue area. I will just say that all of our work is kind of is united by this principle that we could all be doing our jobs perfectly, but if we are not working together, the county, or indeed we're talking about a whole system at this in this conversation, would not improve. And so that is my challenge to you as we dive into this conversation together. Is it is one thing to show up and we are all tired. I am tired. And just letting you know what I'm about to share with you only represents about half of the work that I do. I've got about a whole other 50% of projects in my work. And that's not in any way to brag, but to say I want to invite y'all into this conversation with me, but more importantly, into the work, because we have a lot to do. $53 billion disaster is what Hurricane Helene is being currently calculated to cost. That number will likely go up, and we also know that some of those losses will never come back. Certainly the 103 people in North Carolina alone who died will never be coming back. There is work to do. Many of us people in power, have access to some power, who are on this call. At the very least, many of us paid to be on this call. So I invite you into the work and challenge you to do something with what we should learn today. Here's what I want to do. Give you 5 things to know about the Inclusive Disaster Recovery Network. I'm going to pause after that and say, what do you want to know more about? Because there is a lot of different places that we could go with this conversation. And depending on timing, we'll wrap up with just a little bit of a couple things that I think I've learned over the past 5 years from doing this work. So here's 5 things to know about the Inclusive Disaster Recovery Network. Shout out to the Outer Banks pictured here. One is, as you heard earlier, North Carolina Inclusive Disaster Recovery Network. I really try to avoid abbreviations. That's part of putting the inclusive in inclusive disaster recovery. Abbreviations are one of the ways that I think we exclude people and create an in and an out group. I want to avoid them as much as possible. I'm going to give myself, if it's okay, just a little bit of a pass on the name of this network because it is desperately long. I blame my boss who created the name, and so sometimes we call it NCIDR or Insider. By the way, it used to be called the Hurricane Matthew Inclusive Recovery Group because that's when it was started. I don't think they referred to it as HMERG at the time, but I kind of hope they did. The North Carolina Inclusive Disaster Recovery Network is a collaborative of public, private, nonprofit, and faith-based organizations seeking avenues for community voice and for equitable access to resources in our disaster recovery system. I said we began after Hurricane Matthew in 2016, and the purpose of the network, why it came together as separate from something like the voluntary organizations active in disaster. I know there are folks here from Florida, from Georgia, which have active VOAD groups. Why this network came together is not just the voluntary organizations, but a lot of the groups that are on the call now, consultants, academics, and researchers, state government folks said, we work 360 days out of the year with a lot of community-based organizations. What do we do right now when so many of those organizations are struggling because their communities have been hit by a disaster? And so it was about allyship from the beginning. What is it that we do as folks who have access to resources and knowledge and connections? How do we use those on behalf of and alongside our community-based partners? We have a mailing list of over 650 contacts, which is about 470 agencies, organizations, and communities. Obviously, the bulk of them are North Carolina connected, but state, federal, and local are all in there. The increase since 9/26/2024 has been about 40%, which just shows you how it is one measure of the scope of the impact of Hurricane Helene. And we are a diverse coalition of leaders. We work together across sectors. This is, again, one of the things that makes us unique, a little bit different from VOAD organizations, voluntary organizations active in disaster. We're not just some of those faith-based ministries, although they are both as a VOAD affiliate and some of the individual VOADs are part of our network, but we also are a lot of policy and advocacy organizations, community-based organizations, government at all levels, faith-based, academics, philanthropy, business, media, and also just really passionate individual community organizers. We also convene across place. So again, unlike, say, a long-term recovery group focused on a particular county or even set of counties, we want to look at the state. And indeed, MDC has a 13-state footprint. So folks ask us, is there a South Carolina Inclusive Disaster Recovery Network? We say, we're not sure yet. We haven't heard, but we know that there's opportunities for us to replicate or extend the work that we do regionally. This map, outdated. If you want to bookmark that link down at the bottom, you can. We're getting ready to update it with all of the folks who have joined us more in the west of I-77 corridor after Helene. Across issues as well. Again, not just across sectors, not just across space, but thinking about how the flood mitigation impacts housing, impacts environmental justice issues. What is the impact of administrative policy on all of those things? We are trying to look at a systems level and not maximize one issue opportunity or another, but look at a systems level together. I work with a leadership team and also increasingly a group of policy-oriented folks, a policy team. And I would say typically I don't present about the network alone for reasons of how things have been going recently. I'm here alone today, but I want to acknowledge while I am representing the network today, I am certainly not representative of it. It's why I usually work together. It's why we have a leadership team that helps to build ownership and share power, that represents the diversity of our network across a range of different dimensions of diversity, And that really helps to set a strategic vision for the Insider Network and hold us accountable to it. It would be very easy for me to end up as a gatekeeper in this work, and that is not the intent of an inclusive disaster recovery network. Here are some of those folks and the organizations and geographies that they represent. My role then is as a facilitator. I don't come with a background in disaster recovery, in emergency management. I technically have a degree in public administration with a focus, a program that was very focused on local government. I don't even claim that. My background is in working across lines of difference, working across organizational boundaries. That's what facilitation really means to me. A focus on the process, or as Adrienne Marie Brown puts it, making it as easy as possible for complex people to do the complex work of shaping change together. I suspect that's what this partnership comes together to do as well. And we work across 4 different collaborative strategies for the academics out there. I'm stealing, adapting these from a big literature review of network theory by Pop et al. 2014. And this idea that one of the functions of networks is sharing information, another is generating ideas and exchanging them. We do advocacy work, not lobbying, but advocacy work. And I will push anybody in this call, wherever you fit in this work, you can advocate for change, whether you're an academic or a state government employee. I know you're typically saying, well, I can't do that because, I can't advocate. I don't think that is true. I think you and I would have a conversation where we would say, hey, if you're a state government employee, you are often in an advocacy role with your federal cognizant counterparts. So our Division of Emergency Management talks to their counterparts in FEMA and DHS at the federal level all the time. That is an advocacy role. If you are an academic, you have an extremely valuable role to be playing, trying to get evidence and science into the policymaking process about why it is that, say, an eviction moratorium during a disaster makes people healthier, helps communities recover faster. And then we do some capacity building work as well, making sure that we are not doing the work alone, but building up folks who we do the work with, helping them do what they want to do better. Let me pause there and ask y'all, what is most helpful to hear about next?
Thank you, Andy. Claire and I are going to scan the audience here, looking for hands. You can either raise your physical hand, raise your virtual hand, add questions to the chat box. Okay, I'll kick us off. Andy, what does inclusive mean to you? And has your definition of inclusive changed over time?
When we talk about inclusive, it shows up in a couple of different ways. One is just uh, a sense of belonging and welcome, right? I let people know this meeting. One of the ways that we have been consistent and persistent is by meeting monthly, and we have been doing that since 2016. We say inclusion is in the name. Everybody is welcome in that meeting. We take steps during that meeting to make sure that everybody is made to feel welcome. That shows up in how we facilitate. I also have a particular interest in connecting folks into the policymaking process. So one of the problems that we wanted to solve by this network is that after Hurricane Matthew, it was clear that a lot of the infrastructure that had been in place, the community leadership infrastructure, those community action agencies, they had been intentionally dismantled by North Carolina legislative action and executive action since Hurricane Floyd in 1999. Those were a critical piece of infrastructure that were no longer there to help elevate the expertise of communities into how decisions were being made. We're also clear that we want folks in power to be investing their resources into communities. So while we take a real asset-based community development perspective, we believe the wisdom is in the room. We also think there are resources at the federal and state. I mean, that's how emergency management work, right? Otherwise, all disasters start and end locally, and there wouldn't be anything else in between.
Yeah.
How that has changed over the years is I just want to shout out the ability of technology to
Okay.
make meetings more inclusive. So we have ASL interpretation, we have Spanish English interpretation. It makes it very clear that that language barriers are not some grand difficult managed retreat. That is a complicated issue, right? Language barriers are not. They are a technical problem that are easily solved with a contract, and $125 an hour is what I pay for.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I
Great, great.
saw Farah has your hand up.
Hey. So your network is very healthy with 470 agencies. And so I was just wondering if your group has conducted social network analysis to look more at closely at your, which I'm probably asking this question too soon, um, at your ecosystem, your network ecosystem.
Great question. And yeah, I'm a big believer that people will ask questions that I probably would have told you about already, but it's more fun when we get to dialogue about it together. Um, and and yeah, it's something. It's one of the network analysis is one of the things that I wish I had learned about in grad school, but I didn't know that I needed to know about it until afterwards. We've got some partners, some of whom are part of this partnership at North Carolina State University and also at the UNC School of Government, who have helped us do some of that network analysis. It's tricky because we're talking about a large number. And so we've struggled in some ways to figure out the best way to measure some pieces of it. I think one is around we typically have point data. We know where somebody's office is, but we don't know how to map what their geographic reach is. And that's interesting to us because we want to know not just kind of where people are, but how where they are intersects with, say, governance over water in their region. Um, and so we've got a project funded by NCC grant, but also philanthropy is interested in this, right? They want to know who knows whom, so that they can make their giving a little bit more equitable. But have you been able to do some network analysis in your work? What's worked for you in analyzing how networks work?
Well, I come from the Southeastern Coastal Center for Agricultural Health and Safety that's funded by CDC NIOSH. And so we're just jumping into this. We are a young center, so we're only in cycle 2 of each cycle is 5 years. And so we've partnered with Danielle Varda. She used to be out of RAND a long time ago, created this tool called the Partner Tool. Danielle Varda was at RAND. She moved over to University of Colorado, and now she leads this company called Visible Network Labs. So we've just jumped into it and have gotten unbelievably excited about how we can measure impact in our outreach core. So we're using it as an evaluation tool.
I'm interested both kind of in the descriptive sense because it's one thing if everybody knows me, but that's not helpful in a network setting. We want a much
Right.
more density of connections. Also curious if there are any patterns of people who are, say, less connected in the network. But then from an evaluation perspective, we're keen on that too. We have uh, what you're seeing on the screen was us testing a little bit with an assumption that, hey, if people have showed up to a meeting, if they were on the same meeting, they have some level of familiarity with each other. That was a test in a survey that we ran end of last year through the beginning of this calendar year. We asked some more questions about, hey, who would you go to if you had questions about equity? Who have you worked with in the past, or at least just measuring degrees of familiarity. But it is tricky to work at scale and define that out. I'd love to connect with you and learn more about the visible networks folks.
Yeah, perfect. We'll do
Yeah.
that.
I would too. I think,
Okay, we'd love to share it. It was very exciting.
yeah.
Kate,
And
sorry,
go ahead. Go ahead.
Kate, anything in particular about information sharing capacity building?
No, not specifically, but just I think in particular the capacity building work that you or strategy that you
Hmm.
just kind of things that you focused on.
Sure. Real quick on the information sharing, we meet monthly, and consistent and persistent are the words that I keep using. There's some folks who have been telling me recently about how bodies and communities of bodies react to trauma, and that having that consistency really helps people who are in crisis have a predictable next opportunity. And that's certainly not my background. I can't comment further on that, but frankly, most of what I do as a facilitator is people tell me things and then I tell it back to them. I've never had an original thought in my life. So if there's anything on here where you're like, I want to learn more about this, I will find the citation for you of where I learned it. Um, for us, it also lets people know it is part of the inclusion is that there is always this space to come back to. So we meet. You also join us. Some sign up. We show up, in a lot of partner conversations. I've got a blue bar on the side of these two slides because this is kind of the blue skies version of this. In gray skies times during disasters, this is what Helena's worked, which is I don't know a whole lot, but I try to know a whole lot of people. And so in the early days, kind of the 25th, 26th, 27th of September, a lot of what was just happening after 5 years doing this is a lot of people have my cell phone number. And it's my job to have other people's cell phone number. And so that was checking in on our partners in advance of the storm. Um, Yancey and Mitchell County, Burnsville, North Carolina, if you know it, were particularly horribly hit. One of the biggest issues was that Web EOC, the digital platform for Emergency Operations Center, it didn't work. You can't. Yancey and Mitchell, they could not get onto the internet, even with all of the systems that they had. And so we were playing a relay role with one of our nonprofit partners who was literally walking back and forth from her house where she had a little bit of cell phone signal to the county emergency manager, and who was deeply frustrated because he needed support and they needed to go through the formal channels of requesting support from the state. But in disasters, and the place that I sit facilitating this network is really in the middle of, on the one hand, I have a master's in public administration. Some of my best friends are bureaucrats, so I understand the need for those protocols. We also are a network that includes a lot of folks who create parallel structures because they know the mainstream structures don't include everybody and sometimes they break down. So playing that relay for impacted areas, making sure the right people know each other, and then certainly there is a really important role for emotional and spiritual care. We put a lot of messages out in the early days. There was so much information. Some of it was unclear or not synthesized or dis and misinformation. And so from the very beginning, it was here's what we've learned today. And I will brag on our network to say that I got a message from a senior state government official early on who said, I continue to be so impressed with the vast amount of information you are clearly communicating. Thank you for this. I am sitting in the Emergency Operations Center with access to everything, and your message is still incredibly helpful to me. Put another way, I got some of the best praise I've ever gotten from a faculty member at NC State, and she said, I know you were hella busy, but not for nothing. You do send a nice email, extremely well written, which means a lot to me as a keyboard warrior in this work. On capacity, and notably, we sent everything bilingually. We have, I will push always for professional translation and interpretations of information. But in a pinch, I have been given permission by our community-based partners who speak Spanish and work with Latinx communities who don't always speak Spanish, but other languages from the region. They said, look, in a pinch, Google Translate and ChatGPT these days do a pretty good job. So there's no excuse not for putting the information out there in multiple languages. On capacity building, Blue Skies Times, just definitions, because it's got a lot of meanings. Capacity building, UN calls it the process of developing and strengthening the skills, instincts, abilities, and processes and resources that organizations and communities need to survive, adapt, and thrive in a fast-changing world. That dovetails really nicely with our definition also of community resilience, right? It's having at the community level, not individual, there's individual resilience as well, and I will again leave that to people who know better about it, but communities having access to resources that they need to thrive. We've had a couple of projects during COVID. There was an understanding from philanthropic folks that when you got a disaster like COVID that is so big, we are we had to rely on community-based organizations, and indeed FEMA recognizes that too, right? The national frameworks say that all disasters start and end locally, that whole community approaches are necessary. You've got to be working with the folks on the ground in rural communities in particular, in marginalized communities in particular, because those are the folks who know the best, who are most trusted in their community. And if for some reason, say COVID dries up their funding streams, or a volunteer who'd been running the organization for 2 decades retires, that community is made more vulnerable because that asset is missing. So we were able to do some capacity building work, strategic planning, succession planning, a little bit of conflict mediation is always inherent in our work, to help some selected organizations who received a grant from a consortium of funders after in the early days of COVID, and pairing that with capacity building resources. We've done some work as well trying to, again, as I say, connect community-based organizations into the policy process, advocating for the investments of public funding, American Rescue Plan Act, currently the, forgive me for the abbreviation, IIJA, it's one I always forget, Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and the Inflation Reduction Act, trying to get those invested. Gray Skies Times, I've mentioned North Carolina VOAD, the Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster, one of our peer organizations, or to your point about like network mapping, I have this theory that the NCIDR network is a network of networks, and I'd love to do a better job mapping that out, testing that. But we have our peers at the Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster. They're really good at mucking and gutting and mudding houses and tarping and chainsaws and all of that. I am not good at that. What I'm good at is running meetings, helping people have better conversations. And so when their usual calls, which are like 30, 50, when they swelled to 175 in the first days after Helene, it was a lot. And half of their board, half their volunteers were in Western North Carolina. Either they were based there or they had gone out there really quickly. So we talked to our partners there and we said, look, not every role is our role in a disaster, but one role we can play is help people have a better conversation. If you're willing and able, we'll help you behind the scenes. We like to be wallpaper. We'll help you kind of organize those meetings, document them, get good information down, and we continue to do that. That's one of the things that we can do in building capacity. Alyssa asked in the chat about who translates your work and interpretation. There are a couple in North Carolina, mostly I go to 3 interpreting co-ops. They also work, because a lot of this is virtual, they work around the southeastern region. Be happy to share names. I think they all do fantastic work. And we're also clear as an organization, given the work that we do, we need bilingual and binational staff or bicultural staff, because representation matters both actively and passively in the work that we do. Alyssa, do you, as you know, I'm senior with NOAA, as a federal employee, do you have access to internal resources for translation and interpretation? Or do you all have to contract that out?
Good morning. Yes, so we usually try to work with internal folks that are native speakers if we can. And depending on the project, so I work regionally, but depending on the project, we're able to contract that out sometimes, but there are stipulations to who we can use, and that's the federal government. But um, we historically have used different Sea Grant offices that have folks that can help us translate. Um, but I have heard feedback from some partners that it can be a little difficult regionally because there are different pockets of Spanish translations, and there's different ways to translate the same terminology. But um, I'm happy to connect offline maybe and get some of those contacts that you said that were based. You said they were based regionally, different co-op translations services.
Their main offices are in North Carolina, but I know they work with interpreters around the Southeast,
Gotcha.
and can do either virtual, hybrid, or in person, with those various teams.
Okay. Awesome. Maybe we can connect offline and see if I can connect with those folks. Thanks.
I hear, Alyssa, you also talking about the boundaries that we work in, right? We none of us work in a vacuum, and so being in, uh, you know, being subject to federal procurement laws, that guides how you do your work. We have some flexibility as a nonprofit that allows us to do some things a little bit more flexibly, and so looking for those partnerships has been a way that I think our network has been successful. Say, having funding from Sea Grant, partnering with a university partner, but making sure that we take on certain roles that it's easier for us to do, or say where we're able to have a much lower indirect cost rate than a university would, and get more of those grant funds invested in the communities.
It's like Claire
That's
has a question.
Thank you. So I just wanted to say thank you, Andy. I appreciate the answer to that.
Yeah, I'm wondering with your work to, create inclusive networks, how maybe some examples or strategies that you use to make sure that participation, especially with underrepresented groups, is more than just symbolic. Um, and kind of I have a background with working with people with disabilities, and in the work that I've done, I've found it's easy to make sure that everyone has a place at the table, and not as easy to make sure that everyone has a voice that is actually being listened to. So I'm just kind of curious about some strategies or thoughts around that.
It's the $1 million question, right? We're all trying to figure out how we put equity and inclusion not just into the outcomes that we're looking for, but the processes that we use to get to them. Use an example of a time I got it wrong, which is that folks in North Carolina may know, our state, the Department of Environmental Quality, is working on a big flood resiliency blueprint. And in partnership with the Environmental Defense Fund, our network said, we want to try to influence the process of this blueprint plan, right? This flood mitigation plan. We want to let DEQ know, the Department of Environmental Quality know, here's what it means to put their own public participation plan into action. And so we started a participatory planning process. We went to members of the network in affected communities geographically and through other dimensions of diversity, and we said, let's answer this question together. Y'all tell us, what does equitable community engagement look like for you, right? And not going to community members and saying, here's how you participate in this mainstream process, but saying, y'all tell the folks in state government what they need to be doing, how they live up to their commitments. We came in, one of the tools that we sometimes use as a facilitator for time is we bring a proposal to the group and we say, hey, here's something to react to. We're not starting from a blank page. Here's something to react to. What's right, wrong, missing, or surprising? It's my favorite four questions that comes out of my mouth all the time. And they said, we often also ask like a tool of fist of five, five, this is perfect, zero, illegal, immoral, or ethical, we got to stop and start over. And they basically told us we need to stop and start over, right? You've made some assumptions that are too far down the line. Another thing that came out of that process was in our initial, we submitted some comments in a public comment period to DEQ, and they said we they said, look, this was written up pretty well. You see that original document on the left. So it was, you captured most of it, but you weren't explicit about race. And if we're not being explicit about what the problem is, then we might as well not be talking about it. And so we had to go back and say, we thought we put it in there. I talk about race, gender, other forms of identity all the time in my work. Our team is very comfortable naming these things and also leaning on each other. Typically, we facilitate, for example, in multiracial and or multi-gender teams, depends on what the need is for the group. But they said you need to be more explicit with this, and so we sent a follow-up letter that said, hey, we didn't name the thing, and we got to name the thing in this. Last kind of tool in the work is partnering with community-based organizations. And this is one of the things that it is possible for federal folks to do this. It requires a little bit of administrative burden on your end, but y'all have, pre-award specialists who can help you figure this out and navigate this. EPA has, in fact, required it for a lot of their recent stuff to put together more partnerships with folks on the ground. As a nonprofit, I have a lot more flexibility with this, but we were able to use some funding, and this was, again, related to the flood resiliency blueprint. Instead of me going into, say, Pink Hill, North Carolina, or Vandermeer, North Carolina, and saying, hey, I want to get together a bunch of folks here, we said, well, we've got partners there. Let's pass through a good chunk of money to you, and y'all invest it to make this work. Y'all, hire childcare and organize catering and pay your staff for the time that it's going to take to do this. And that we find to be much more successful.
Fantastic. Yeah, and great insights, Andy. And I think what you bring to us can be applied in many, many regions. Wondering if you would put your email address into the chat box. As we approach the top of the hour, I want to make sure folks can contact you. You can give out your cell phone if you want to. And they may have follow-up questions for you. So I appreciate that. And thank you so much, Andy. Thank you so much for taking the time to provide us with updates from NCIDR, the North Carolina Inclusive Disaster Recovery Network. And we hope to see you in Wilmington. Thank you, Andy.
Thank
And
you. If I can sneak in real quick.
Yes.
To review, disasters are not natural. You know this. People on this call know this. They are the choices made. They are part of policy. And so we encourage you to do that. Work with the community-based organizations, not the ones that have disaster in their name. That it takes diverse networks and power sharing to make this happen. And it requires those relationships to happen before there is a disaster. Networks are not self-administering enterprises. You need to have that coordination function, and it costs money to do it. And if you saw my post on LinkedIn, I love this quote, that collaboration is like cottage cheese. It occasionally smells bad and separates easily. So make sure that when you are doing this work, to Claire's point, that we are not further marginalizing people through collaboration, but really giving them a voice. So thanks.
Fantastic. And thank you for leaving us with that call to action. I appreciate that, Andy. Please follow up with Andy if you have additional thoughts and questions. His network is a role model for many of us, and we look forward to crossing paths again soon. Thank you, Andy. I just have a few announcements. Next, I want to tell you we are booked with webinar speakers until February. On January 23rd, we will co-host with our parent organization, Socorro. We will feature Kaylee Mooney, who is finishing up her graduate work at Florida Gulf Coast University. Kaylee received the Socorro Data Challenge Award last year to further her research aimed at implementing vulnerability into historic hurricane normalizations. And then on February 27th, come find out how the Department of Defense is moving resilience efforts forward in 2025. Please join us for a joint presentation featuring Dr. Michelle Covey, the Coastal Resilience DoD Liaison at the Marine Extension and Georgia Sea Grant in Athens, Georgia, and Mr. Arnie Olson, the current Deputy Public Works Officer and the former Southeast Installation Physical Resilience Program Manager at Naval Station Mayport, right here in Jacksonville. We look forward to seeing all of you here online for these outstanding presentations. Also, never miss a resilience-related opportunity. Claire is building an extensive, accurate, and up-to-date calendar webpage. So please go to scdrp.socorro.org/calendar to see what events are coming up. Also, if you have webinars, conferences, workshops, and other events to add to our calendar, please shoot us an email at scdrp@socorro.org. Thanks. We have a few moments for some partner sharing time. What other announcements do you have for us today? I see a hand. Randall, yes.
Hey, I just wanted to share that I know a lot of communities have been impacted from Tropical Storm Debbie and Hurricane Helene. So there is mitigation funds that are becoming available for that through the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. So applications for that are due to FEMA. The date I have here is September 30th, 2025. But just for Helene alone, there's $414 million available, and that can help out, state governments, local governments, certain nonprofits may be eligible for that as well. But that's an excellent opportunity to try to invest in some resilience efforts for your community.
And Randall, is there a link that you can drop into the chat for that?
Yes, I can. It will vary from state to state, so I can pass stuff from Georgia along. So that will be eligible for everyone in Georgia, but they would need to work through their state mitigation office for that as well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Randall. Thanks for that update. Other announcements from the group? Okay. Well, as you know, we always are collecting announcements. So thank you for those that shared. We'll scan the chat box as well. And always, anytime, please send your announcements, resources, and updates to us at scdrp@socorro.org. And we will further share those on both our website and in our next newsletter. So this concludes our December monthly partnership meeting. A very special thank you to our super speaker, Andy Shoenig from NCIDR, the North Carolina Inclusive Disaster Recovery Network. And thank you for joining us today. We will see you in a month on January 23rd. Thank you again and happy holidays.